we can go back to you now. We won't have his picture, but we have him and his voice. And I don't know where you were.
I'll try to pick
3
up.
or 4 minutes.
It's okay. I'll try to pick up where we were. So what we were talking about is that the Fed conducted stress tests on the largest financial institutions, said that the financial institutions are healthy but that the capital forecasts tend to be strongly dependent on the assumption that there will be additional rounds of economic stimulus. Then we established, that was 5 months ago, there have been no additional rounds of economic stimulus. And in the meantime, we've seen a lot of negative economic indicators, and that indeed the banks are now saying that they anticipate higher default rates. So the question I had been asking Vice Chair Quarles is, without stimulus, do these big banks and ultimately the financial system run more risk?
So I should note that, as you noted in your original question, the bank's projections themselves assume stimulus, but our stress tests have not assumed any stimulus. We want to ensure that the stress tests that we
fair enough. Look, but that's not the question I'm asking you. And also, the question about how much capital they've got obviously goes to the heart of your stress test. And you said right there in the stress test that the projections on capital depend on there being a stimulus. And look, families need help. They've needed it all summer while Mitch McConnell has stubbornly crossed his arms and refused to let us vote. And now Senate Republicans are doing even more damage to our economy if they don't put a relief bill out that is big enough to get the job done and up for a vote. So, this is a problem, obviously, at the Senate level, but the Fed itself is not powerless as well. You could act right now. You're allowing the big banks to continue to shovel billions of dollars out the door in dividends, money that could be used to help survive an historic downturn. You could stop this outflow of money right now. So at what point, Mr. Vice Chairman, will the Fed actually do its job and suspend all dividend payments?
Bank capital ratios have been rising over the last 6 months, Senator.
That's not the question I asked you, Governor Quarles. What I asked you is, what data are you going to need to see in order to actually take action here? We're watching a downturn in this economy. The stress tests specifically say they're based on the assumption there was going to be stimulus. Mitch McConnell has refused to let us get a stimulus. So I'm asking about the billions of dollars that the banks are still pushing out the door in dividends, because ultimately the American taxpayer is going to be on the hook if these banks are not able to meet their requirements going forward and need bailouts.
So we are running stress tests currently, and our stress tests do not assume any stimulus. We're running stress tests currently to determine the resilience of the banking sector. We ran them in the spring. We ran sensitivity analyses in the spring. We're now running additional stress tests taking into account what happened in the spring and the condition of the banking industry and the economy as a result of that. We'll have the results of those stress tests revealed publicly at a bank-by-bank level by the middle of December, and then we will use that information to inform our determination whether we would continue the suspension of the 70% of capital distributions that we have already imposed on the banks and the limitation on the dividends that they may pay, or would adjust that in some way.
Let me just stop you there, because we've already had to do this for a long time. Your job is to protect the American people, not the bank investors. And I don't believe you're doing your job. Mitch McConnell has changed his tune. He said he wants to pass a relief bill before the end of the year, and I think that's great. But America needs a real relief bill, not a fig leaf. There aren't enough fig leaves on the entire planet to cover up the Republican Party's monumental failure to take this coronavirus seriously. So Americans are now falling sick at the fastest rate since the pandemic began. It is time for you to stop letting these banks shove money out the door, stop making excuses, and do your job. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.